The late afternoon sun hammered down on the asphalt of Marine Corps Air Station Miramar with the kind of relentless heat that made mirages dance on the tarmac. The air smelled of jet fuel, salt from the distant Pacific, and the particular brand of institutional confidence that only a fighter base could produce. Captain Derek Lawson stood at the entrance to the Officers' Club parking lot, his uniform crisp despite the oppressive warmth, his hand up in a gesture that was more traffic cop than military courtesy. "Ma'am, this lot is for authorized personnel only. The visitor parking is around the corner." The woman in the white sundress didn't stop walking. She didn't speed up either. Her movements were unhurried, almost meditative, as if she were strolling through a garden rather than approaching a restricted military facility. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her sunglasses hid her eyes, but there was something about the set of her shoulders, the way she carried herself, that made Captain Lawson's instincts prickle. It was a bearing that didn't match the civilian clothes. "Ma'am, did you hear me?" Lawson stepped directly into her path, his voice rising slightly with the particular brand of irritation that comes from being ignored. "This is a restricted area. I need to see your dependent ID and the name of the officer sponsoring your visit." The woman stopped. She tilted her head slightly, and for a moment Lawson thought he saw the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. When she spoke, her voice was calm, measured, and carried none of the flustered apology he'd been expecting. "I'm not here as a dependent, Captain." Her tone was neutral, but it had a quality to it, a quiet authority that made him pause. He was 27 years old, a Marine officer with 3 years of service and a chest full of qualifications he wore like armor. He looked at her again, reassessing. Mid-40s, maybe. Fit. The way she stood wasn't quite civilian. There was a readiness to her posture, a subtle coiling that suggested she knew exactly where all the exits were. "Ma'am, with all due respect, if you're not a dependent, then you need to check in at the visitor center. You can't just wander on to a military installation." He gestured back toward the main gate, his patience thinning. "This isn't a public park." She didn't move. "I'm aware of the protocols, Captain. I was stationed here once. A long time ago." Lawson's jaw tightened. He'd heard this before. Civilians who claimed some nebulous connection to the base, usually trying to drop a name or reference a long-dead CO to gain access. It was a game he was tired of playing. Stationed here as what? A contractor? He didn't bother hiding the skepticism in his voice. "No." The single word hung in the hot air between them. No explanation, no elaboration, just a flat, simple denial that somehow felt like a door slamming shut. Lawson felt his temper flare. He was responsible for security in this sector, and this woman, this obstinate, overly calm woman, was making him look incompetent in front of the other Marines and officers walking past. A few of them had slowed their pace, sensing a confrontation brewing. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification, now. If you can't produce a valid DoD credential, I'm going to ask you to leave, or I'll call the Provost Marshal's office and have you escorted off base." His hand drifted toward the radio clipped to his belt, a gesture meant to underscore his authority. For the first time, the woman's expression shifted. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to disappointment, a weary kind of resignation that made Lawson feel, for just a split second, like he was the one being tested and failing. She reached into a small leather bag slung over her shoulder and produced a wallet. From it, she pulled a card, not a dependent ID, not a civilian contractor badge, but something else. She held it out to him, without a word. Lawson snatched it from her hand, his movements sharp with irritation. He glanced down, expecting to see a retiree ID or maybe some outdated credential he could use to justify his suspicions. What he saw instead made the breath catch in his throat. The card was a DoD Common Access card, active duty. The photo was clearly her, though slightly younger, hair pulled back in the same style. But it was the text beneath the photo that made his vision tunnel. Harrison, Julia A. 07, Brigadier General, USMC. Lawson's world tilted. He read it again, and again,
07, Brigadier General. His eyes flicked to the expiration date. It was current, valid, undeniably real. He looked up at her, his face draining of color. She had removed her sunglasses now, and her eyes, calm, steady, and utterly without malice, met his. They were the eyes of someone who had seen more, done more, and forgotten more than he could imagine. His voice cracked. He swallowed hard, his hand trembling slightly as he held her ID. General, I'm sorry, You didn't ask, she said softly. You looked at a woman in a sundress and made an assumption. It's a common mistake, Captain. The words were gentle, almost kind, but they cut deeper than any reprimand. Lawson felt his face burning, a hot, sickening shame flooding through him. He'd challenged a general officer. He'd demanded her ID like she was a trespasser. He'd threatened to have her escorted off base. Around them, the Marines who had been watching now stood frozen, their faces a mixture of horror and fascinated disbelief. This wasn't just a screw-up. This was a career-defining disaster unfolding in real time. General Harrison, Lawson stammered, snapping to attention so rigid he thought his spine might crack. I apologize. I had no idea. That's the problem, Captain. Her voice remained even, but there was steel beneath the silk now. You didn't know, and you didn't bother to find out. You saw what you expected to see. From across the parking lot, a voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Captain Lawson!
Every head turned. Striding toward them with the purposeful gait of a man on a mission was Colonel Marcus Reeves, the base operations officer. Behind him was the command sergeant major, a mountain of a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite by an angry sculptor. And behind them, moving with the smooth coordination of a protective detail, were two military police officers. Lawson's heart stopped. He was finished. Absolutely finished. Colonel Reeves reached them in seconds, his eyes taking in the scene, the frozen captain, the calm woman, the small crowd of onlookers. He didn't break stride. He walked directly to General Harrison, came to attention, and snapped a salute so crisp it could have cut glass. General Harrison, Reeves said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. Colonel Marcus Reeves, Base Operations Officer. On behalf of Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, welcome back, ma'am. We were notified of your arrival, but apparently the message didn't reach all personnel. His eyes flicked to Lawson for a fraction of a second, a look that promised a reckoning. General Harrison returned the salute with the same calm precision she had shown throughout the entire encounter. Colonel Reeves, it's good to be back, and there's no need to apologize. It's been a long time since I wore the uniform here. Reeves lowered his hand, but remained at attention. Ma'am, if I may, I'd like to provide some context for those present. He turned slightly, addressing not just Lawson, but the growing crowd of Marines and officers who had materialized as if summoned by the drama. General Julia Harrison, Reeves began, his voice ringing with authority, is a legend in Marine aviation. She was one of the first female FA-18 pilots in the Marine Corps. She flew combat missions in Operation Desert Storm, logged over 200 carrier traps, and served as a Top Gun instructor before most of you were born. Lawson felt his knees go weak. He knew that name. Every Marine aviator knew that name. It was in the history books, in the War College case studies, in the quiet, reverent conversations older pilots had late at night in the ready rooms. Reeves continued, his tone hardening. She commanded a fighter squadron, led a Marine Air Group in combat, and currently serves as the Deputy Commander of Marine Forces Pacific. She holds the Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 air medals with Combat V, and a Purple Heart. She has forgotten more about marine aviation than most of us will ever learn. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the distant roar of jet engines seemed to fade into nothingness.
Colonel Reeves turned his gaze fully on Captain Lawson, and his voice dropped to a low, lethal calm. "Captain, you will report to my office at 1600 hours. Bring your notebook. We're going to have a very detailed conversation about situational awareness, professional judgment, and the importance of not making assumptions based on what someone is wearing." Lawson's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, sir." General Harrison held up a hand. "Colonel, if I may." Reeves immediately deferred. "Of course, ma'am." She turned to Lawson, and for the first time since the encounter began, her expression softened. It wasn't anger. She wasn't going to let him off the hook, but there was something almost instructional in her gaze, a teacher recognizing a teachable moment. "Captain," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "I'm not angry with you. You were doing your job. Security matters. Vigilance matters. But here's what you need to understand. The standard is the standard for everyone. Don't soften it. Don't lower it. But you have to apply it fairly and intelligently. Before you challenge someone, before you make an assumption, look, really look. See the person, not just the package they come in." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I've spent 40 years in this uniform, and I've been underestimated more times than I can count. Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes it's exhausting. But it's also an opportunity, a chance to remind people that strength, courage, and leadership don't come in just one form." Lawson nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He felt the weight of her words, the grace in her correction, and the profound humiliation of his own failure. General Harrison turned back to Colonel Reeves. "I appreciate the escort, Colonel, but I think I can find my way to the O Club from here. It's been a few years, but some things don't change." Reeves smiled, a genuine expression of respect. "Of course, ma'am. But if you'll permit me, I'd like to walk with you anyway. We have a lot to catch up on." As the two of them walked away, the command sergeant major lingered for a moment, his eyes on Captain Lawson. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look said it all. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career, son. Learn from it." 3 weeks later, Captain Derek Lawson stood in front of a classroom full of junior officers and senior NCOs at the Marine Corps University. He was part of a newly instituted training program on implicit bias, professional conduct, and the dangers of making assumptions in a diverse military force. On the screen behind him was a photo of General Julia Harrison in her dress blues, her chest covered in ribbons, her one star gleaming on her collar. "This," he began, his voice steady but laced with humility, "is the story of the worst day of my career. It's the story of how I looked at one of the most accomplished officers in the Marine Corps and saw only a woman in a sundress. It's the story of how I almost derailed everything I'd worked for because I was too arrogant to ask a simple question." He paused, looking at the faces in front of him, young officers, eager, confident, just like he had been. "Don't be me," he said quietly. "Don't let your assumptions define your leadership. See the person, respect the rank, honor the service, every single time." Months later, General Harrison was shopping at the base commissary, her cart half full of groceries. As she rounded a corner in the cereal aisle, she nearly collided with a familiar face. Captain Lawson froze, his eyes widening. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to bolt in the opposite direction. "Captain," General Harrison said, a small smile tugging at her lips, "good to see you." "General," Lawson stammered, snapping to a half-attention that was awkward in the middle of a grocery store. I didn't expect—" "Relax, Captain," she said with a chuckle. "We're both off duty, and I'm pretty sure the uniform code doesn't apply to the cereal aisle." He managed a weak smile. "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to say, again, I'm sorry for—" She held up a hand, cutting him off gently. "You've apologized enough. What matters is what you do next. I heard about the training program. That took courage." Lawson's face flushed. "It was the least I could do, ma'am." "It was the right thing to do," she corrected. "And that's what matters. Keep doing the right thing, Captain. That's all any of us can do." She gave him a nod, pushed her cart past him, and continued her shopping, leaving him standing in the aisle, a little lighter, a little wiser, and a lot more grateful.